Welcome to the World Collective Master Talk series. Today's guest is Lee Moreau. Lee is the founder and director of Other Tomorrows, a design and strategy studio based in Boston. Today we will be discussing, in spite of the attempts in the fashion industry to shift to more sustainable fashion, why has this been so confounding to everyone involved? What are the most significant barriers to change it? Today we have Lee Moreau, who is the founder and director of Other Tomorrows, a design and strategy studio based in Boston. Previously, Lee was the VP of Design at EPAM Continuum, Director of Environments at 2x4, and worked as a designer at IDEO and Rockwell Group. Lee is also Professor of Practice at Northeastern University College of Arts, Media, and Design. We'd like to welcome Lee.
Thank you.
So Lee, the World Collective is launching this education series and really to focus in on the continuing efforts of sustainability and social opportunities as it relates to design, to product, to the industry at large. What we'd like to do is really kind of get your take, your perspective, great background, and obviously in the academic world, we'd like to really take a kind of parcel as to what you really think is happening. One of the thoughts I had is, how do you really categorize the human dynamic that is playing out in this contemporary fashion space right now? What do you think the consumers are in, how are they really impacting the industry and what they're doing going forward?
Thanks, Jeanine. Thanks for having me. It's an interesting dynamic that's taking place right now. So I think humans really love buying things. We love shopping. So fundamentally, we love buying things. And we love buying things not so much because of the things that we get, but because of the rush that we feel when we make that purchase.
Absolutely.
So when you, right?
Yes,
so
yeah.
when you click buy, or
Yeah.
you actually, when you pay, you get more of a rush than when you actually get, when you're putting the thing on. So
Yes.
if it's
Yeah.
apparel, it's not like putting on a pair of gloves or putting on a jacket. It's paying for that thing. That's the moment of
Yeah.
acquisition.
And it's also for buying for other people, it's not only for yourself, right? You just
Exactly.
feel that endorphin rage
Right.
and rush going on.
Yeah, so that feels good, and we love that. But also the position that apparel and fashion holds in our lives has also shifted as well, because it's no longer about, if you think of the essentials, the human needs that we have, right? You have food, shelter, clothing in the sense of like protecting yourself from the elements, keeping
Yeah.
yourself warm, right? Those are like, if you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, these are right at the bottom. Except when we talk about food, we're not talking about eating at a Michelin star restaurant,
No,
right? And
no,
we're
no,
talking
of
about
course not.
shelter. We're not talking about going to the Four Seasons. And with apparel and fashion, we're not talking about, well, what we're actually talking about is luxury fashion, right? So
Yes.
like now it's like the rush, that feeling, it's no longer about basic needs, we're talking about self-esteem and self-actualization.
Well, how people see you in the world, right? It's a
right.
reflection of yourself, so to speak.
Yes.
And so people, I guess, these days are really identifying with how that and who they're wearing. And
Yeah.
so with that, I think there comes a responsibility for these brands, not only to create self-awareness and self-esteem and showcasing the quality of luxury, but also to do this in a responsible and purposeful way that has meaning. In the spite of these attempts in the industry, we're shifting to a more sustainable fashion. Why has it been so confounding to everyone involved? From your perspective, what do you think is the most significant barrier to this change?
I think the system is not really set up to succeed, in the sense that there are clearly efforts that are happening in the industry, that are happening among these large brands, because they don't want to feel, at the end of the day, I think they are mindful of
Yes.
the fact that what they are representing now might not be what they want to be representing as seen from the future, right? So
Right.
there's a mindfulness. They're already starting to prepare themselves for it. I think the big factor here is behavior change. And so what's happened is we've put people into a habit of consuming and buying and engaging in fashion and apparel in a specific way, but now we want them to shift, and
Yes.
people don't shift behavior very rapidly.
No.
And the effort it's going to take just like with quitting smoking, right? The effort it's going to take to get people to really change their behavior will take decades. I don't know if we can afford decades.
No,
so we
we
have
can't
to move
seem to
much more
afford it.
quickly. We can't afford it, right?
Yeah, we can't afford it because of obviously the climate change. You see what's going on now, and not to bring that off piste, but you see what's happening in the world right now, and we wonder how it's the everyday businesses right now can really impact the future capability. But I think to another point that you just made was, we have dumbed down fashion to such a point to it almost is more expensive to buy a cup of coffee these days than clothing that you can get on some of these fast fashion direct to consumer or brick and mortar stores online. So how do we get people to turn that? I mean, behaviorally, is it a big campaign? Where do you see that coming from?
I think there are many aspects of this. So part of it has to be the way that we communicate the value of apparel and fashion and what it means to us. I think we have to think more about fashion as a platform, clothing as a platform, and the longevity.
But we can't keep pace with the ever-changing shift. As when you realize that a cup of coffee at Starbucks costs more than some T-shirts or clothing that you get online or a party dress that you want to go to for an event, how do you help shift that, especially as we come out of COVID, especially as we start seeing the inflation, really hitting scale to a lot of people, and unemployment it seems to be holding, but the shift of the consumer and where we're going on this business journey, do you think it's kind of shaming people in a way like smoking?
I don't think we'll have to get to that point. I don't think the shaming will have to happen, but I do think there will be a recalibration in how many goods we put into the world. So if we're trying to reduce our waste and our impact, we have to just produce less. And so the key thing is going to be we need less stuff in the world, we need less individual units. That will probably mean less profits for corporations. Now, I think if we can be careful, and I think you are going to see a separation of companies that are going to find a way to produce less goods and maintain profit margin. They're going to charge a little bit more for it. They'll message it.
Well, it was how we were, 40, 50 years ago, where basically you really saved your money to buy that merchandise, right? And you really decided that you wanted that per season. You're going to put all that money aside and you're going to buy these few pieces to add to your wardrobe. So, there was a staple, it was an investment opportunity. And what I saw recently, just 2 days ago in one of the kind of industry publications, was some really alarming information, which was the Gen Zs and younger generations now are looking at luxury as an investment to make money in resale. So they're taking this downward shift and they're buying and they're turning profits now. So is that a good shift, or is that a shift towards a better way of producing and a better way of consumers understanding, or is that just the same as just fast fashion?
So I think there's a risk that by equating apparel with luxury, there's a danger in that, and part of that is we also associate sustainability with luxury right now, which actually doesn't make a ton of sense.
No.
But right now in the current mind space, you think of sustainability as being, well, I'm going to have to pay more for it. It's going to be harder to achieve. We have to really break that model. So I think that's a system-wide rethink of how we produce everything. It's going to mean producing less, being very mindful, changing the way that we describe certain objects and purchases as being more sustainable, as having more longevity to them, as being better. You mentioned shaming or being, I think shaming will start to happen. The good news about younger generations is they are easier and quicker to change their behavior. So I think everything you see right now that's very image-based, it's very about what it looks like, and a lot of apparel is being purchased just because of the picture that I'm going to take, right? I think that can shift into something which is more about what this piece of apparel or this image means to me and means to the world. Those are narratives that I think can be changed. And
so do you see, and this is just, we you know, at Hagas, like, I'm really kind of working in the space of metaverse and where, you know, NFTs come into play, and imagine now that they're doing fashion shows and they're creating new content digitally. People can create their own avatars. They could, you know, dress themselves up and change the way they're looking. Do you see something like that possibly taking off in the future?
That's already happening. So yes, I think smart brands are already engaging in that space and building their own ecosystems for that. Like with every technology, there are concerns, but I think there's also a ton of potential with kind of connecting the image with that medium in a really powerful way. Now, what I think one of those risks potentially is when we transition the sustainable implications in the physical world into the digital world. I don't know if we've actually solved that yet, but again, I think this is something we definitely need to explore, and leading brands are already doing it.
So they are leading, they are moving, and you see a lot of controversy along with that. You know, the consumption, the waste of energy that's needed to even create these new worlds. So, you know, are we creating another hazard as we start to move away from overproduction? Are we creating another, you know, reason for sustainability and for energy resources to be drained?
I think we are. I think we are. There's a risk of transference, and I think that's something that we need to be mindful of. But in that transition, I think there's a ton of opportunity if we can be mindful of it. The culture is clearly shifting. I think some of the messaging around what apparel means to us is shifting. So, but you know, identity is connected to so much of what actually brings us to commerce in the marketplace right now. It's like, I'm trying to feel better. I'm trying to self-actualize. I'm trying to promote myself. These are all things that are wrapped up in the mind of the consumer, and these are complicated things. And so we need to all do our best in this industry to kind of change it.
So do you think that it's more about the future, the younger generations from Gen Z on, for them to really make the impact? Or is it up to everyone throughout every generation to make it?
Every generation needs to do its part. I think that we don't have time to waste in this regard, right? So I think younger generations are going to be quicker to adapt and make those shifts. And maybe they're going to help later generations also make that jump. I also think the consumption in the younger generations, even though there's less money, is much higher. The kind of need and the speed, it's really the need and speed coupled together is something we really have to attack quite quickly. Older generations tend to make slower purchases. They tend to be more mindful. It's also like time consuming to make purchases. Who has the time?
Right, and they also have the mindset of not wanting to change, isn't that? They're kind of stuck in their ways and really find it hard to really go down the new path.
I would say, like, one thing that I think would be an opportunity is for younger generations to start to engage, especially coming out of this pandemic we've had, to engage in physical retail experiences again. Because there's a kind of limiting factor that comes from physical retail, right? You can only carry.
That's a really interesting point. I think that what we post-COVID or during COVID, we realized that, you know, online and connectivity through, you can still have everything you want, you know, just at a click, you know, at your fingers. So I do understand. And where do you see the shift? Do you see more going into brick and mortar, or where do you see that retail opportunity happening?
I mean, brick and mortar is on its heels already, because e-commerce has been so efficient and so successful and such a huge part of our lives, and it's helped us get through COVID. At the same time, I think if we can transition from the traditional, meaning 20-year ago version of what retail was, into much more experiential retail, if you look at some other kind of almost museum and quasi-museum experiences getting folded together with retail, I think those experiences are something that young people want to engage in. I think just having the mere fact of having to carry the object that you buy to someplace, the kind of spatial aspect of that is a very powerful one, and I want more connectedness between the human and the thing that they buy, and not less.
I think that's great. Do you see anybody really in this space right now who is leading in the kind of this experience at retail?
The streetwear brands, the sneaker companies, those companies are.
Those seem to be the cutting edge of trends at this moment, right? People are really engaged in what they can really offer and how quickly, but it's also becoming an incredible business model for themselves, right? Buying it when the new launch comes out and then reselling. It seems to be they're replicating that now in luxury, right? So taking what happens in sneakers and streetwear. Urban streetwear, however, and then moving that into kind of now how the Gen Zs are trying to, create opportunities through luxury marketplaces, buying the Chanel bag and then reselling it, or getting that Birkin, or getting something that is hot and trendy at the moment and being on that list, and being able to turn that at 2 or 3 times a profit. So, my fear is really if we're changing for the right reasons and if we haven't really clicked yet. I mean, has it really hit us that climate change and the fashion industry and all these other products that we're buying and needing are really affecting how we live? Are we really doing it the right justice, and how else can we make some major changes besides buying less?
So I don't know if you remember the movie Fight Club.
Yes.
Okay, so there's that scene, and people reference it all the time, which is like where he's like going into the IKEA and he starts to see the prices over all the furniture in his apartment. He's in his apartment, but he's looking at the IKEA furniture and it looks like a retail experience. Imagine you can go to a retailer, like one of these fast fashion companies, or a streetwear brand, and you actually, through augmented reality, through the glasses you're wearing now, which are clearly very fancy, you could then see, the implications of every product, right? So, like, where was it sourced from?
Right.
What is that material? How much, what's the amount of water that was used to produce that object, that piece of clothing? I think that's something that there will be a store.
But isn't that kind of what Google and Snapchat were trying to do when they kind of do that? But it didn't really take off on that. It was too soon. But then you also have QR coding, and you have digital tagging. But do you see the consumers, or really what is the information they're looking for? Do you think they're really looking to find out how much water is there, or what kind of information would they really be kind of eager to really connect with?
I think we're on the verge of, we're experiencing climate crisis already.
Yes.
Over the next few years, we're going to see much more awareness about these things, and so there will be companies that are very bold with saying, okay, this is how much water it took to do this. We've reduced, this piece required this much less water than it did 3 years ago. I think people are going to be really ready for that.
So do you think people then will just start running out to buy these kind of clothes, or do you think that's going to be an important part of their decision making?
I think, well, 2 things will be, they're going to be much more aware, and they're going to buy more selectively.
Okay.
And yes, that will affect their decision making. And so the question is, the brands that win will be able to leverage that information and sell the right amount of product that can sustain their business, but also fuel their growth, right? Whereas other brands will probably not be able to succeed. And so more technologically enabled brands, they're able to combine sourcing, the way they're producing product, with the way they're marketing and selling product, are going to be the ones that win.
I agree. And I also want to say, we're both in innovation. We've also come from this mindset. And, for me, I see the opportunity of how the sourcing portfolio will start to change, especially as it comes to inventory, on demand, customized to exactly to your fit, and so that you have it. Kind of, I think Nike started it, a few years ago with the ID and how they were, customizing, your sneakers or your gear. I see that as a capability. I see, people wanting to be different rather than looking at the high street fashion or the big box brands and saying, okay, well, everyone I know, if I walk into the party, might have this, right? So, with the diversification of opportunity, just kind of like had the sneakers, how really that area's, created an opportunity for design in which everyone can really customize and feel different than they're not all walking around with the same shoe. So as we start to move in this innovative new way, we start to look at what is that experience, how does that change the way you buy, Is it much more customized business portfolio? Is it geared towards me and making you feel a little bit more special?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is. And what's interesting is like Nike that you mentioned, Burton snowboards, right?
Yeah.
Some of those early explorations were about changing the image, right? I think what we're seeing now in the last few years is a change in the performance of the piece, right? Whether it's a snowboard or whether it's a sneaker or whether it's the collar on your shirt or something like that, or the way that it fits. I think moving from image to performance is actually the transition that we need to make. That's what we need people on Instagram saying. It doesn't just look good, it also performs differently, and that needs to be our narrative. Because if we focus on performance, then we get into those issues around sustainability. We get into sourcing, we get into materials, we get into what are the molecules that are used in this piece, and how are those different from things that we would have used in the past. So if we can make the kind of consumer headset shift from image to performance, I think we can really engage them in new ways. But that we all have to get on board with that.
Yeah, yeah. And I just wonder how technology, digital opportunities, the way the metaverse is really moving quite quickly to the experience at brick and mortar, where the sourcing, because the whole world is now changed. We see the supply chain clogs and congestions. We see how geopolitical situations around the world are changing where or how we used to do things. And I think that is super important for brands now and for young people to really consider where and how they're buying things, right? I mean, you want to buy something that is contributing to the welfare and not creating poor conditions for somebody else, and I don't think anyone, I think what you need to do is also question the costing structure. And maybe, we saw Everlane many years ago try to open that transparency of factories and opportunities, is that more information is better, and how are people going to be able to get that? Because I find sometimes it's clumsy when people try to do the QR code or they're not connecting. How can we really, you think that we can really start connecting and to the consumer? Because right now it's industry to business, but if we can get out to the consumer, what do you think will be the unlock for them? Like, is it the customization that will drive someone to the performance factor, or is it peer pressure and social, responsibilities that are happening in the influencer space, so to speak?
I mean, I think storytelling is really important, and I think storytelling is the thing that's most critical in changing people's behavior, right? So when we're trying to get people to stop smoking, we had to tell stories about both what was bad about it, right? And that actually wasn't good for you, but also what could be good about a future without smoking. The same is going to be true for all these other stories. I think where we kind of need to go is to a place where we can tell these stories, but we also have a lot of information. So early brands that have come out by giving lots of information and lots of data, some of them have been claimed, people are quick to say, oh, that's greenwashing.
Yes.
We have to blow through this greenwashing phase. That's kind of,
yes.
It's going to happen. It's happening already. We're going to have to keep providing more and more information and better data. Then we'll move through this transition. We'll transition through this greenwashing phase into one where people have absolute expectation for lots of information throughout their purchasing experience and their use experience and so forth. More is going to be better in this regard. I think that consumers may not know how to process it yet, and we'll have to show them how to do that. But in time, that will be fine, and we'll
right.
We'll
so we're saying less is more in product, and more content and
Absolutely.
Information is better for the consumer.
Yes.
So, you in innovation, you with your students and the work that you're doing at your studio and your teams, where do you see the next? And it doesn't have to be even apparel. It could be any kind of product, services, and lifestyles. I mean, we're all driving. And we're using it in all different levels. We just happen to focus on different things, whether that is beauty, whether you're talking about what you're sitting on, your furniture.
Yeah.
Where do you see the next step going past the greenwashing?
In this area, so storytelling and more information, coupling those things together, and I think brands that are going to succeed are going to be ones that are able to tell compelling stories and back it up. All right, and to do that, they're going to have to put a lot of emphasis on getting that data and putting it out there. So that's going to require a totally different way of behaving than a lot of these companies are now. That's one thing.
So transparency and traceability.
Absolutely. But telling it in compelling kind of qualitative, not just quantitative stories. So we
Can
have
you
to
give me an example of something maybe you've done or you've seen?
You have to make it emotional, right? So where I think company like Everlane did a good job is like presenting the information, but it didn't always manifest itself in a story that I could connect to.
No.
And so when you see a lot of the streetwear brands, they tell these are the masters of telling compelling stories, right?
Yes.
And so I think you'll see a company like Adidas or Nike basically be able to parallel path. Here's all the information, and here's why it really matters to you who's waiting in line to buy, a pair of sneakers, something like that. That's what's going to really help people
So
change.
do you think that it's going to trickle down from the bigger companies and give us a kind of pathway for some of the kind of more designer brands or luxury brands to really, kind of shine through and even maybe polish up the messaging and storytelling?
Yeah, I think it will come from two directions. I think it'll be large established brands that do this really well and have scale coming down. And then there'll be new emerging players that we don't know, that don't exist yet, that are going to be very good at the storytelling and very good at the sourcing, and they're going to come from the bottom and will converge. And a lot of stuff in the middle probably will shake out and won't survive, right?
Yes.
So we're going to see that taking place. Another area that I think is going to be important is going back to the beginning of our conversation about like what people are really doing in the marketplace. They're just buying things, right?
Yes.
So I think we can satisfy people's need to buy in different ways that don't require us to put more physical material into the world.
Right.
And metaverse is one way of doing that, but I think there are other ways that we can satisfy that need, that sort of get that endorphin rush, right? That dopamine hit, right? When you make that purchase. I think there's other ways to achieve that goal.
Well, if you figure it out, I definitely want it.
I think we can do it for sure. So that's another area that I'm excited about. And then I think there are new ways that we can think about the longevity of
the durability and longevity, like kind of what you used to buy when you were younger, where you really kept it and you handed down, and it was something, an investment piece that something that your grandmother gave you or your great grandmother, and then it still lives in my closet. And I think that is, I think that's an unlock. Well, that kind of is where you see right now these kind of pioneers in the Gen Z area going into the luxury. Obviously, they're seeing that trend and they're moving to that trend. But then it becomes, to me, a double-edged sword in the sense that we're just moving and shifting, the elite, where we're really going to spend that money, and it's still overproducing in the same way.
So what I'm hopeful is that we can do, and I love books. This is going to seem like a tangent. I love books, right? I have a lot of books at home. But what I see is happening generationally is that people are having fewer and fewer books on their shelves, right? I think we do the same thing to our closets. And I think being much more mindful about the things that we have around us, whether they're things that we read or things that we wear, is something that over time people don't want to be burdened with all of this stuff. I frankly think fashion apparel is lagging behind where books were, and that's because a lot of companies are making a lot of money in that space delaying this trend. But there's no question that young people don't want to have all this stuff in their lives that they're dragging around. I think smart brands are going to see that. They're going to capitalize on it now, be early to that, to get there, and hopefully tell the right stories about, where that material comes from, what they're doing, and those are the companies that win.
Great, I like that. I mean, I would love to see some of these other brands that are not really doing what they're supposed to shake out in the middle and really see pioneers and good brands moving forward. If you could just give us one wrap-up idea, where would you kind of, if you were a brand, if you were someone out there right now looking to take the next step, or you don't know where your next strategy would be, can you give them just a little bit of advice as to where you would start?
I mean, I think somebody's going to do something magical where they're selling a lot less of what they've sold in the past and still making money. They might find a way to do it by selling nothing. And I know that sounds crazy, but I do think there's a way, especially in this world where we care so much about the image and we care so much about buying that the actual good, the apparel, the product, the piece is secondary or tertiary to that experience. And I think there are going to be brands out there that find a way to crack the code and take this piece out of the equation altogether.
Well, I'd like to see that happen, and I think this is an amazing moment to really end or wrap up this conversation. I want to say thank you, Lee.
Thank you.
It was really lovely to have you, and we know we will come back to you again for the future. Thanks. Okay.
Thank you, Janine.